Good morning, everyone. We could call the meeting to order. We've got four members of the five-member Transition Peer Committee either here or on the phone. I've got Pastor Lewis Murphy, one of our members, on the telephone. Pastor Murphy, can you hear us?
Yes, I can hear you. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Good morning.
In today's meeting, we want to finalize the three parts to our deliverable to Mayor-elect Kreisman and the rest of the transition leadership. Those three documents include our final report, objectives for the new committee that we're going to recommend that we form, or that he forms, and a process and timeline to move forward to ultimately build a pier here in St. Pete. The other day I received a document from Gary Brooms, who's sitting right here, on a possible pier selection process, and I want to pass that out to our members. Oops, and we'll go ahead and talk about that here in just a second. But why don't we just go around the room briefly and have everybody introduce themselves. We've got a lot of guests here today. You want to start out?
I'm Jeffrey. I'm on the Transition Task Force team and active member of the Historic Kenwood Grand Central District and a slew of other volunteer efforts around the city.
Hello, John Tapp, pastor of Holy Family Catholic Church in Northeast St. Pete, and work with FAST. I'm the co-chair, which is a social justice organization here in Pinellas County.
Hi, I'm Gary Brooms. I'm the CEO for Mesh Architecture and Mesh Fabrication. I'm also the president of the Downtown Neighborhood Association, and I developed the Z-Grill restaurant and teach Tai Chi classes a couple times a week.
Dan Harvey. I'm on the board of directors of the Edge Business District, on the board of the Downtown Neighborhood Association. I sit in the Central Avenue Council, and I'm on the board of directors of Concerned Citizens of St. Petersburg.
I'm Bud Cairns. I'm CEO of Cairns Engineering Group. We're consulting civil engineers. And I'm on the board of Concerned Citizens.
Fred Whaley on the board of Concerned Citizens, Asset Management, William James Financial.
Bill Ballard, Board of Concerned Citizens, retired attorney, St. Petersburg.
Leonard Schmiege, just a local activist and media person, reporting stuff to YouTube on the Shadow channel.
Chris Velasquez, City of St. Petersburg.
Vivian Moore, Tampa Bay Times.
Bud Risser, trying to be retired.
And I'm Ed Montanari. Wish I was retired. But welcome everybody. We've got quite a bit of work to do. As I've said in the past, we usually have our meetings conducted rather informally. From time to time, I'll ask citizens to weigh in, but we do have these three documents that we've done work on already, and the leaders of the transition team have asked us to finalize our work, and they're due tomorrow by close of business. Just to make things a little bit more interesting, my schedule requires me to fly down to Brazil tonight, so my goal is to try to get this work done today before I blast off for Sao Paulo. Let's start out by addressing that process that Gary sent the other day. Gary, do you want to explain it? Just take a couple minutes and explain.
Yeah, hopefully I can do that. When we had the last meeting, somebody said, hey, got any thoughts on this? That made me think a little bit more about it. And in a nutshell, what I'm suggesting is that we start by either eliminating the pyramid from possible renovations by finishing the engineering study on it and saying, okay, you can't save the pyramid itself, but you can or cannot save the caissons. if they could say what kind of, you could speak better to this, like what type of loads they could handle. In other words, will the pyramid sit on top of the caissons for X amount of time? Assuming that either the caissons are usable or the entire building's usable, you can go forward with a competition saying, or a design process, however you want to look at it, saying that that's a possibility. I think we have enough information in terms of what we think the people want, that if the city would determine general programming based on the information we have, that we can give to the architects, that, we put out a modified RFP, RFQ and say, here's what demolition is going to cost for the various scenarios, here's the programming we'd like, here's the task force findings and stuff from the most recently completed survey. Please take that into consideration and come up with something. At this point, nobody's spent any significant amount of money. I'm suggesting anyone who wants to play in this, come up with a couple design boards, do a master plan, a conceptual rendering, and at least have a budget and present their qualifications and their team. And then we put together a selection committee that really just narrows it down to 5 to 8, assuming you get that many. You got 23 the last go around, and you didn't have to do anything other than put a team together. And that's, each submission has to have a budget, life cycle costs, environmental, structural, regulatory things. They'll all be assessed and looked at by the selection committee and city staff. So that whatever goes through the selection committee as approved is something we feel at that point is buildable. That we've kind of vetted the logic of it anyways. And then they give each of the finalists $15,000 so they can maybe flesh out their proposal a little bit, and you let the citizens vote on, I'm just making this up, 5 to 8 proposals if you had that many. Because I think we're going to end up having another referendum if we don't find a way to let the citizens actually vote on this to some extent. And we can keep asking the same questions we've been asking for the last many years, and we'll keep getting the same answers. Or we can try and get some designs out there and then let the citizens at least weigh in. I'm not saying it has to be an official vote, but that was kind of my thought, was that don't spend so much time trying to continue to get input. Get something out there for people to look at and raise their hand. I like that one, don't like that one. So that's it. That's all I got. A copy.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I want to introduce Nikki Gaskin-Capehart, who joined us. Nikki, we just started out, and Gary sent a proposal in for another process for us to consider, and Gary just went over the process. Pastor Murphy, I forgot about you. Can you introduce yourself to the committee, please?
Well, it's Murphy, Pastor Murphy, good to see you, church. Good morning.
Morning, thank you. Well, what are the committee's thoughts on this process?
I'm just curious about what kind of information that Gary was asking for has been in some of the reports already. I mean, the engineering studies, the feasibility studies, the budget for keeping, renovating, or demolishing. I mean, how much of that's already out there?
There's not an official position, so to speak, on it, and somebody here could probably speak more intelligently than I can. The caissons were tested, and the question was asked, will they hold up the canopy of the lens? The question was not asked, and the calculations were not made to say it can do better than that.
Well, in reality, the only exploration that was done was pouring through the outer sheet piles into the concrete. The caissons are concrete encased big steel H-piles. And so they're only looking at the protective layer. And there was no definitive answer given. There was one very brief statement in one of the documents that I saw where a civil engineer said he thought he might be able to carry 60% of the original design. So, but that was just conjecture as far as I can tell.
Chris, you want to weigh in on this?
Bud's right. The original corings, I think, were about 24 inches deep and 8 or 10 inches in diameter. and generally showed that there had not been substantial intrusion of a negative. The real structure is not just the concrete, but the steel embedded within. That being said, was interesting because there's not a formal opinion on what the ultimate load-bearing capacity of those caissons are, and it's you can get an engineering analysis on what that would be. It's not what it is today, though. It's what will it be in 40 years. That's where you need somebody to put their license behind that statement that these can handle that. And I don't, not to speak for Mike Connors, but I don't believe that there's a mistrust in the caisson's ability to withstand some long-term support of the existing inverted pier construction. In the bigger picture, I think that's only a part of the question, though, is, it's not just the can it hold it up, but what is the downstream maintenance, both above and below the water line, the life cycle cost issue. When you're starting with a 40-year-old project, and I don't think too many people challenge the above the water condition. It's start the below the water. All the pictures that you see that look nasty, that's just the steel sheeting that's effectively holding in the concrete. All that matters is the steel within the concrete first. There's about 20 I-beams per caisson, and then that surrounding 20 by 20 foot caisson. And so there is not a definitive answer to that, but I believe city engineering's opinion is that they're 40 years old, but they are substantial, and don't have too much problem with them lasting a number of more years. And then that begs the question: is that okay? So that combination of maintenance and ultimately what you want to live with.
Okay, good. Well, thank you. And I don't want to get too much in the weeds on some of this, the details of the existing pier, because this committee was asked to come up with a deliverable of how the mayor-elect should move forward on the pier subject. And we have come up with 3 different things. We've got a final report, we've got a process, and and the process includes forming a new committee to do a short-term study of the pier and update the work of the pier task force. And then we've come up with some objectives for this committee. My concern, Gary, with bringing this process into the fold at this late date, it's like, okay, we've kind of gotten almost to the destination as a committee, and now we've got this other idea, should we change course and adopt your process, or should we put it in with the rest of the public input as something for the administration to consider going forward? I think that's what our committee needs to decide.
It was interesting. It was a reception last night of, I thought, a rather educated group of people on this topic, and the diversity of the opinion in that group. And again, this is where I've been harping on the education process about getting people up to speed on facts versus fiction is important. I think fundamentally, though, what I like about Gary's idea, I don't think we need to reinvent the wheel here, but I think if we go back to this January 2014 Create a Pier Working Task Force and highlight a little bit more about getting the correct information, which we've done in our objectives of asking for that engineering report. I think if we add one line item in there that really says, let's definitively determine what it is we're working with some way, wording we can work on in a second. I think it's important to do that, because I think the reality is we've still got a community that, for the most part, despite everything that's occurred over the many years here to get us to this point, has a lot of opinion versus fact, and I think it's important that we get that fact out there of, you know, what are we working with here? What's it gonna cost us? Is this something that can be taken forward? Fundamentally, we need to get that either put to bed or understood before we move forward. So somehow I think in that January 2014, we ought to highlight the idea of let's really get that engineering study accomplished and determine what facts we have to work with.
Right, that's a very good point, and, you know, within that step in the process, to create a peer working group, we've come up with another document, what do we want them to do? And that's the objectives. And one of the objectives is to do a complete engineering and cost analysis of the existing pier. That's where I think we cover that subject. That's one of the main things we want this new committee to study. And because I totally agree. There's a lot of questions out there. The caissons, you know, how long they would last, the demo, is it feasible to rehab that building? What sort of lifespan could we be looking at? And I think the citizens and the people that are ultimately going to make the decision, which, you know, are elected officials, they need to know all this information in order to make an informed decision.
And Chris, you said there is some of that information out there already though, right?
There's volumes of information out there. Go back to 2003, the initial studies, and the Peer Advisory Task Force did a number of engineering studies as well. Throughout the subsequent consulting processes, there's been a lot of studies done out there. And then most recently, of course, there have been some numbers put to, the engineering departments put together numbers on a couple of alternatives, and those have had a third-party review as well, outside review. So it's absolutely can continue to be done. There's issues that nobody paid much attention to years ago, and that was, providing an allowance for structural wind load upgrades to the existing inverted pyramid structure, which was designed for a 90-mile-an-hour wind load. Today, just to pass muster, it's, I think, 134 miles an hour. So that doesn't mean the pyramid has to go away, but that structural steel that supports it, it would likely have to be reinforced strategically. So those things that were not even contemplated 2 years ago as the potential to rebuild the pyramid. So I think it's not a bad idea to really add one comprehensive and final take on all of those issues, from caissons to structure. And I keep, sound like a broken record, but again, life cycle cost analysis.
Right. Good. Ben?
1 minute. The caissons go 40 feet through the mud, I understand. Just in case you don't know how significant they are, they go 10 to 15 feet through water, 40 feet through the silt or the mud, then into bedrock. Okay. And in those caissons, they're 20 feet by 20 feet. So imagine one, there's 4 of them, plus the one underneath the elevator. So the caissons are huge. The 20 I-beams he's talking about, which we haven't tested, those I-beams I think are 17 inches. So the caissons were designed to hold another floor on top. So to think that the caissons, originally we thought they were no good. We were led to believe that. We still don't know today. But just keep in mind, 40 feet through mud, into bedrock, all those giant I-beams in there. So you've got solid caissons, more than likely. And that's the starting point.
If I could add something, that not only will you be educating this new committee, but that will help the public as well.
And the public needs to know. There's all kinds of things. This is kind of like unraveling a sweater. I mean, when you start down this path, I mean, you get into all kinds of different issues, and that's one of the reasons why the initial Peer Advisory Task Force we were given 12 months to do our work, and we extended it because it was like, you get to these questions and it's like, well, we better look into that, or we need to hire another engineering firm to look into this issue, because you wouldn't have a final report if you didn't kind of go through all these different kind of trails and figure out, is it feasible? The whole causeway question kind of comes to mind. Because some people thought, well, why don't we just fix the whole thing by making it a causeway? So we hired an engineering company to do an analysis on that. It turned out to be cost prohibitive.
That's a perfect example, just if I could interject, in terms of how information shows up. Even doing your best analysis in the present time, information can show up down the road. That entire causeway analysis did deem it completely unfeasible. But more importantly, following the permitting process, working with the Army Corps of Engineers for over a year now on the past project, it is more importantly than the feasibility, it would never get permitted. I mean, right out of the box, it's a non-starter. And I know it was Randy Wedding really wanted that causeway, and the Army Corps has unequivocally said, ain't gonna happen, causeway. So but that wasn't part of the consideration during the task force. It was more based on functionality and feasibility. So.
And Chris, just one quick thing, and again, I don't want to get too much in the weeds, but I know Parsons Brinkerhoff did a study of a causeway maybe 8 years ago or something like that, because I remember reading the report, and they had all these different ways for the tidal flow to go pass through, so you wouldn't have any problems with silting and changing the currents within the bay. I mean, it was a pretty in-depth.
There's no question it can be done. It's from a design and constructability perspective, it happens today. DOT, in fact, the examples the Army Corps gave us is the actual bridge over the Howard Franklin is maybe 3 miles of bridge, but you've really got 8 miles of bridge when you tie in the causeway, those long causeways. They said we would never build those causeways today. Whether it's permitting, environmental, any number of factors, we couldn't do what we did back then today. It's just, that's not the environment that we're in. So that's part of the evolution of the permitting process to some extent. It absolutely, it can be constructed. There's ways to do it and help to mitigate or minimize the disruption to sea life. That's one of the biggest issues. But at least what we've heard from the Army Corps tied to any type of adjustments to Spa Beach, causeway out to the pier, there's just don't waste our time, and certainly don't waste your time.
Okay, well, good. Well, should we put this suggestion for this new process in with maybe an addendum to our report as public input for further consideration?
And so you also could, for part of the objective that we discussed, we could expand the objective to complete engineering and maybe add life cycle in with cost analysis, just to kind of give a little bit of a reference to.
Okay.
Yeah, I think if we put that in as an attachment, I think that, I like Nikki's idea, but I also think that when you go back here in our outline, it just behooves us somehow to add one more bullet statement that reminds everyone to complete engineering study as outlined in objectives.
Okay.
You're just setting it up that, let's really check off. That is an important issue.
Okay, do you want to give me your complete wording, make it more clear? Complete engineering study of the existing pier?
Complete engineering study to include life cycle and cost analysis of the existing.
Yeah, I think that and the objectives is important.
Yeah, Nikki's talking about the objectives, and we're talking about the
I
process.
think all you do is you just complete engineering study as outlined in objectives.
Okay.
And that's another process, equal change.
And then Gary's report can be included with with all the information that's passed on.
I think you're also asking for an updating though too, because it sounds like some of the questions haven't been either posed or answered, so maybe under the objectives that it does include something about not just a comprehensive review of engineering, but an updating for the current pier and for future potential design.
Yeah, I think it's more than updating now. I mean, the reality is, there's many sections that are missing, right? So it needs to be a completion.
Okay, so since we're kind of skipping back and forth between the process and the objectives, does somebody want to give me the verbiage that they want under the objectives?
Old Pierce, solid.
Complete engineering, cost analysis, and
The way that
life cycle.
I originally said complete engineering, and cost analysis to include life cycle of the existing pier, but we want to add updating instead.
I think Bob's point, I think when we're talking about complete engineering, I mean, that's not just an updating, but it's more comprehensive, so, I mean, I get that term, so that's fine.
Ms. Capehart, don't you mean the inverted pyramid? You said the pier, and I believe all this focuses on the caissons and inverted pyramid structure.
I mean, that would be part of it.
Right.
I mean, I think that's understood, that it's what the current design is and what, you know, it would, how it would be able to support future, you know, potential
I think the
design.
point is, though, that the pier includes the approach structure.
That's
the
correct.
pier head, and everything else.
That's correct.
So it's useful to distinguish.
Right.
And there's no, I don't think there's any, I don't think anyone in this room is trying to save
The approach.
Right.
the approach. We're just talking the caissons and the inverted pyramid structure. It was just your use of the word pier is so inclusive, more than I thought you meant.
But with that information that already exists, I think it's important, again, to get it out to the public, because, again, people are still, if you stop 20 people on the street, half of them would say, oh, yeah, there's nothing wrong with it. And that's the problem.
What I'll do there.
So you're okay?
Well, just give me the complete objective.
Complete engineering and cost analysis to include life cycle, complete engineering and life cycle. Oh, now I messed it up, wait a minute. I've written over so many times. Complete engineering to include cost, life cycle and cost analysis of the existing pier. Is that what, get it right again?
Pier head.
To include life cycle and cost analysis.
Okay, that works. Well, good. Let me just kind of go back and get control of my meeting again. Let's kind of just logically go through some of these reports. Let's start with the final report. There's only one change, and then I was told this morning that there's a misspelling of the word. The only thing I changed in the report is in the first paragraph. I added a sentence on the very end about the substantial number of guests from our community that attended our meetings and commented on our process and recommendations. Other than that, it's as it was last Monday. Any comments, questions?
We decided to keep working group, right? Or will we?
Yes, well, let's talk about that. Yeah, at our last meeting, we really didn't come to any conclusion on the name of this committee. So I just left peer working group.
I remember Gary mentioning or implementation piece. I can't remember who said it first, but I know we talked about new peer.
Yeah, I suggested that the word new in.
Okay.
That was,
I mean, it might just be
concept.
I think implementation is good, but I think the biggest issue is, have we differentiated it from the peer task force so we don't confuse people?
Right.
To me, it's semantics. I'm not really that worried about it as long as we just don't call it the peer task force. I think that was the critical issue.
How about the 2014?
Gold plated, silver, whatever, yeah. I think we've done our job on that.
Yeah. I just didn't want us to forget that we had talked about revisiting that.
Right. Well, good. With those changes in mind, can I get a motion to approve the final report?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Aye. Thank you. Motion carries. Just for our guests here, as we continue to work on this, we've had some people here for all of our meetings, some people have not. This process that we have come up with, Mayor-elect Reisman back in June of this year outlined a process and a statement about it. And what we have done is we've taken the steps that he outlined in his process, and then we took the work of the 828 Alliance, and we combined those two processes. There's one substantial difference, though, is we've got a few steps in there where our elected leaders need to make some decisions on where to go with the pier. So that's kind of the overview of what we're working on.
Hey, can I ask a question?
Sure.
And forgive me if I haven't attended all of the meetings. You and I have talked about the importance of soliciting as many different ideas on this project as possible. And I know from my conversations with the mayor-elect why he absolutely believes in that process. When we talk about process here in your report, is there anything there that will bring that on the table for the next group? I'm probably not phrasing this very well, but.
Meaning the limiting of it?
Well, of course, my goal is speaking just for myself, but I think I know the mayor-elect feels this way. I don't want to speak for him, but I think he's sensitive to it, that the best product will come if we get the largest number and broadest opportunity to experience ideas. And this next group of people is going to be in charge of that. And I don't know if that is in your report or not. And if it isn't, I wonder if you would at least consider suggesting that in the report.
Well, we have, I think, throughout the process and as part of the objectives of the new group, we have left a lot of opportunity for the public to weigh in all through the process. One of the things that we don't want to repeat is getting to a point where you've got a group going forward on a process and the public's not up there with the group. Now, granted, I think everybody in this room knows that we're not going to be able to please everybody in the new pier, but you need to do the best that you can. So we've tried to build into this process all kinds of ways for the public to weigh in, for ideas to be generated and to be vetted.
And I guess my follow-up question is that do you feel that this new group will seek a wide variety of proposals from the actual participants, the vendors, or whatever we're going to call them? I mean, there might be architects, but they might be urban planners or whatever. Are they, in this process that you're outlining here, is that encouraged, do you think?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah.
Yes, it is.
I think Bob you had some references to that last time, I think in tandem with you, Chris, about what could be proposed and how it could be
May
responded.
I have your attention, please? May I have your attention, please? We will be testing the fire alarm system this morning. I repeat, we will be testing the fire alarm systems this morning. You do not have to evacuate. This is
our meeting was just the, whatever the methodology is, that that we do stay within the CCNA guidelines. And we're required by statute to, so we don't have a choice, but that we don't deviate from those guidelines. And there's a little bit of flexibility within those guidelines. The guidelines actually require you to base your decisions on qualifications, but there's room in there to allow for any number of ideas to flow, or presentations and products to flow with that. It doesn't preclude it.
So, I mean, that's our understanding, to answer your question. I think what the group does with it afterwards, that might be a different story, but I think that was our sense.
Well, I don't have the opportunity to read what you actually are working from, so I apologize. The main thing is just keep it on the table, so it keeps being discussed.
Let me just share with everybody that on Monday evening, we had a meeting of the leaders of all the committees within the transition team, and with Mayor-elect Kreisman and his leadership team. And when I discussed the pier, and I went through the highlights of this process, one of the things that we discussed is, and in our initial draft at our last meeting, we had a 4 to 6 month process. And as I told our committee at our Monday's meeting, you know, the more objectives that you put out there for this committee to do, the longer amount of time you need to give them to do that work. Well, Mayor-elect Kreisman is clear that he wants to get the pier issue solved. He doesn't want like an endless study. So he asked us to limit the pier working group to a 4-month study. That was one of the changes that I put in. The other thing that I pointed out to the group, it's I said, the more you study this, it's kind of like jumping in a cab. The meter keeps running. The costs keep piling up, and right now those costs are coming out of the capital that we're going to use to try to build this new pier. So we need to bring all the public together. We need to get all these good ideas, but we also need to go through a clear, thorough, thoughtful process. But the bottom line is to build a new pier. So why don't we step through this process document. At our last meeting, we had some changes. Let's see, step number 1, there wasn't anything. Step number 2, create a peer working group. We added another bullet point just a little while ago. Step number 3, conduct a public educational community input process. We used to have campaign in that. We changed the word campaign to process. And then we changed the bullet points. The 3 bullet points under the public educational process include provide public education and background information, re-engage the public, and confirm the community's desired program. Another bullet point I would like us to discuss this morning is, should we add another bullet point to this, consider funding a marketing program. One of the things that I have seen before studying the pier, you know, the public is engaged to a certain extent, but sometimes they get confused over all these different committees and what's going on, and I think maybe we ought to have an outside marketing firm. Kind of go out there and keep the public informed of what's going on.
I guess I'd just strike the word consider.
Okay?
Again, our recommendations can either be accepted or not.
Okay?
So considered happens automatically.
Mm-hmm.
But I think the point you're making is an excellent point, is that that's one of the big issues we went awry with, and if we're really trying to engage the public, let's get the information out there that's correct to them.
The only thing I would say is, we don't necessarily have to outline an outside marketing firm.
Right.
I mean, if we just say fund a marketing
Yeah.
program,
Okay. Any comments, Pastor Murphy? Any comments?
Well, I think marketing, definitely will help. So keeping the people, the community, the public informed as well as, telling the whole, if I'm hearing correctly, I don't hear what everyone's saying.
Okay.
And I think you said it, but I don't know if it wound up on clarified. It's not just establish a marketing or public awareness program, but it's establish a budget for whether it's in-house, out, it doesn't matter. You have to, just like the engineering studies, et cetera, that was something that was not done previously. That there is a budget that has to go with that, and it's important, I think, for the mayor-elect and staff to know that you can't ignore the fiscal realities of it. If you want this thing to get out there properly, you got to spend a little money to get there. And it's not just for the public awareness campaign, for lack of a better term, of existing conditions or whatever that is, but then additionally, once you've narrowed down or selected one product to move forward with, you have to then start that up again. So
That's what I was going to say too. I mean,
it's almost a two-phase.
I don't know if you use the word like comprehensive, because it's something you would just have it here, and you do need it all through the whole process itself.
Right. I would just mention, to budget for that, no different than you'd budget for any other line item in the project.
Okay, any other questions, comments?
Can I speak to that? Sure. I think there was some headbutting last time around as to the facts, the opposition to what the city was doing in trying to educate the public. There was a lot of disagreement. One of the key facts, I think, was the cost to refurbish the pier, because it wasn't detailed specifically what that meant, was with a larger approach. So we started talking about $70 million instead of the original budget of $50 million. So I think you should suggest a way of ameliorating that issue. And what I would suggest is you have some type of citizen input or committee that validates the talking points of any type of marketing campaign. Also, there's a fairness issue. If there's certain people with proposals and the city is saying, or the marketing department for this program is saying, oh, this proposal is really what the city's looking towards, how is that going to be fair to the other proposals? So there needs to be a sign-off process so we don't butt heads, so everybody agrees that, yeah, these citizens, everybody agrees to the set of facts that's being promoted. So I would suggest you include some type of element.
That's actually the whole section you're talking about. I realize you don't have it in front of you, but that was the whole reason we put that whole section in there, was to provide education background, re-engage the public, and confirm the community's desired program before we go into the marketing.
And I think the purpose of the committee is to affirm that too, that it's not just officials from the city, but it's concerned citizens too. We talked about the makeup of the committee that would include that, and hopefully that group would affirm that. I just think in deference to the timeline on this, then you engage the public and say, well, do you agree with these facts or not? And then have a debate about that is going to be really overwhelming. But I think the purpose is having certain citizens on there, or citizens representation on there to affirm that.
I would just add that I would suggest key talking points be approved by citizen committee before tax money is used to promote those talking points to the public.
The 4-month that Mayor Kreisman's talking about to try to do something doesn't necessarily mesh with the consultant that were hired to put a master waterfront plan together. I would suggest that we look at a longer time frame to make sure we have a one-time opportunity to do a waterfront plan, and we get the two integrated together, I think we'd be missing out on the opportunities we have if we try to fast-track the peer process without having the overall process understood around, at least to some level.
Well, Mayor-elect Kreisman on Monday is, and I've spoken to him before in other meetings, he is adamant about moving forward with the pier. I mean, this downtown waterfront master plan, I mean, that process could go on for another year or more.
That was my point exactly. Even if it takes a year, I think it's important for us to get the peer project right.
Well, the pier
To
project
get the
needs to
facts
be
out
right.
there. And so we, Chris can explain the consultant process and where we are with that, and how we have to have everything done by July 2015.
He has the ability to accelerate that, and a lot of us funded that. And we did so encouraging them to pick a more aggressive time frame for exactly this reason. It's one thing to talk about what's built out on the water, but that's only part of the process. And an important part of the process is what happens on, I'll call it Spa Beach, that whole currently undeveloped area right now. And I, for one, think it's foolhardy to decide what goes there before the overall plan is completed. I don't care whether you accelerate the overall plan or slow down the pier, but it would be terrible to decide what's going to go on that beachhead and then discover that that's not what the long-range plan contemplates. It's a management issue about bringing them together, but they ought to be done together.
I think, I mean, hopefully I understand it correctly, but I think the 4-month time period is, and again, you don't have it in front of you, but it's provide education and background information for the public, re-engage the public, confirm the community's desired programming, which they've done in the opinion survey. So it's not to come up with a master plan in those 4 months. I mean, that's for another year. I mean, that's included in that process as you put out RFQs and things like that. So the 4-month thing is really just for public
That sounds good.
re-engagement. So,
That sounds good, just get the process up and going.
right.
And I think the other thing that's important in all these things is if we get the process correct, the timeline's gonna run itself. I mean, you can put a 4-month, you can put 40 months on it. The reality is it's gonna dictate its own. I mean, I think of all the projects that we've done in the past, we put 2-year timeframes on and 1-year timeframes, and you know, some of them have gone quicker, some of them have gone much slower. But if they're following the correct process,
It doesn't go anywhere at all.
Yeah, never quicker, I know.
I think they have the opportunity to dovetail nicely, even laid out with this schedule, which has a November RFQ submittals due. That you've got a bunch of ideas, and by the end of 2014, you should have a pretty reasonable idea of where the waterfront master plan is going. We're not going to wait till July 15 to put it in front of council. We're going to get it in front of council in March, April of 15. So backing into that, your consulting work, it'll spill into the beginning of 2015, but you're going to have a reasonably good idea of where you're going, and it'll be refinements theoretically in the first few months of 15, which is not too different from where this group's schedule has laid out. So I don't think that, frankly, that they're now at this point in time that they're that far off.
The pastor clarified that with his comments, that they'll mesh together.
All right, let's, if we can, let's keep moving through this process. We've got a couple things that are going to take some time for us to flush out here. The next step is City Council establishes a program for the pier. What I wanted to discuss is, should we add something else? Is it just, do we want City Council just to establish the program for the pier? Or should they establish the program and the parameters for the pier?
Well, I think it depends how you want to phrase it. If you want to talk about the community's perspective, I think you can add comments. But if we're really talking from a design professional. The program includes all those details. I think it's semantic. So the question you want to ask yourself is who's reading this and what are they getting out of that? If the case is you're thinking it's the community, then yeah, I think you want to add a few bullet points. Otherwise, I think it's implied.
Okay. Thank you, John.
I don't have any comments about adding anything to that, so.
I don't think it's, program piece, as we discussed it before, includes exactly what we want council to not do from the last time. You know, to avoid, going after a design process without having the program already established. So I think that kind of covers it. But if you wanted to say, establishing a program for the peer, after the community input process, whatever, that's just, but we know that that's what we're suggesting already in the prior months.
Maybe since it's an official document, though, that be included in there. I mean, just like what you had said, just a clarification on it, because someone may read this like, well, they're going to establish the programming in August, and it's going to be done. We're going to have a design by August, and you're talking about parameters, and also doing that with public, input. So I think it would be good. I don't know, it has to be a bullet point in there, but just to expand on that a little bit. Maybe I don't have words.
I have one last input, if I could. Sure. Parameters, I don't know if that means the scope of the project starting at Bay Shore. I missed the last meeting because I went at 7:30. So we came to a conclusion that this project starts at Bay Shore. And so when you talk about programming and parameters, I don't know if you're including all of the uplands in this thought process, because that interlocal agreement changed and allowed the money to be spent all through that. Bud talks about it as expanded Spa Beach, but it also includes Pier Park, everything. So I didn't know if that phrase was including what I just mentioned.
How about if we just do this? If we, instead of say program, let's say programmatic requirements for the pier. And to answer Dan's question, I think in generic terms of what we're talking about, the pier is everything there, how it connects. So I think that's covered. Thank you.
Could I ask a question in terms of interpretation of what you're saying? You say that the council has to adopt a resolution that this is the program. So I get the sense that this document should say that a program will be prepared to be adopted by council. Because otherwise, you're just going to repeat the whole process over again. If council is going to come up with a program. So it really should say the work of committees will be to prepare a program to be adopted by council as of a certain point in time.
That's a good point in a way.
Well, yes, but we're, I guess we don't need to like put breadcrumbs in front of every step that the Kreisman administration is going to take. I mean, the administration is going to recommend the program, and city council is going to adopt it, so.
Okay.
But it's the process that didn't happen the last time.
Let's change the word, though, I think, to address that issue. We just strike out establishes and says adopt.
Adopt.
Again, then it's implied.
Adopt a
the
program.
process.
Because that's what
Where did
happened
it come
before.
from? Yeah, where did it come from?
Yeah.
It might come from multiple sources.
Yeah, go back to the first series of steps, that takes care of that.
Okay, very good.
But also,
Very good point.
add one item that piggyback on that topic is I don't know if there's a differentiation between programs and parameters. I would say there is. Does the program include a range of square footage, a range of restaurant square footages, or that's really a parameter? A program could be you want chainsaw juggling, or the program itself. So the Peer Advisory Task Force laid out some programmatic and parameter ideas. I think that's what it was even called in the Peer Advisory Task Force report, which was provided to all of the first RFQ respondents. So again, it's a semantics on what type of terminology you all want to use. But you want to be clear. Because that's, at the end of the day, it's, well, what are people going to do out there?
It's kind of like, one is like, we want a 3-bedroom house. But they're not gonna say, we want a 3-bedroom house and we want the master to be this size and, we want a 3-bedroom house. I think that's what this council needs to adopt.
Okay.
And then people need to put that together on both the uplands and on the pier itself and put that together and come back with that. I think the program's probably good.
Okay.
The next step, request for qualifications according to CCNA, asking interested architecture firms to submit qualifications only. I added one bullet point at the suggestion of Bob, and that was to include that it's the last bullet point, peer working group final report with confirmation of public opinion.
Other comment?
Sure.
The word only, that seems to be foreclosing the approach to the project, which is permissible under the CCNA, which could include sketches and budgets, all tentative. So my question,
That's how we got there the first time.
And the word architect.
I question the word only.
I think this, Chris, correct me if I'm wrong, but this statement came right out of the 828
It did not.
process.
We asked for a modified, that is incorrect.
That's where I got this from. Do you remember, Chris? We can take out the word only.
We requested a modified RFQ, is what the 828 requested. Okay, not a RFQ in that pure sense of architects only.
But let me look at that while keep moving.
So let me just, from our perspective, talk about it. I think you can get rid of architecture and just have firms. And I do agree, I think the getting rid of the only and design concepts, I just, at this point, we know where we're going, I think it's just added verbiage.
Okay. I don't have any problems with that. Any other?
Very good.
What was the, what's the revised word?
We're going to get rid
So
of
it's
that.
including architecture and,
It would say request for qualifications, RFQ, issued in accordance with CCNA, asking interested firms to submit qualifications, period.
Firms.
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 Qualifications, are there ideas? Is that part?
It could.
That-
It doesn't, we're not pitching.
You don't have to,
anything.
but you
Yeah,
can.
that's right.
I would only make this comment about firms asking for qualifications. If any firm that submits something or says I think I should be part of this, I think I'm qualified. If it doesn't have the ability to stand and seal plans, it's not qualified.
Right.
So eliminating architecture firm doesn't make any sense because you're going to automatically disqualify if it's not an architect.
Well, when you say that, a firm does not have to be an architectural firm.
Your team
Could
has
be
to-
a plan, no, it can have an architect out of
You have to have an
Tallahassee.
architect.
Well,
On the team has to have an architect.
okay, but I mean, that's not a
These
firm.
are all things that are way down the line in this process itself, so we're not
Yeah.
gonna solve that
Yeah,
here.
the whole idea is to keep it as open as makes sense.
It's the CCNA, right?
All right, very good. Any other comment on that section? The next one, RFQ submittals to. And then the next step is where we left off at our Monday's meeting. Submittals narrowed down by a short list by a new selection committee.
I guess I'm gonna go back to us getting too specific here with 4 of this and 2 of this and 1 of that. I think it needs to be community members, design professionals, and appropriate staff and professionals or something. I mean, for us to get specific about numbers, our idea here is we want the community to be well represented, period. And I think that can all be determined and probably will be determined later without us. So I think we can just simplify that one.
Okay. This was the other area where I mentioned at the last meeting, this process that we're putting together, it looks like it's very cumbersome. I mean, adding, first we're going to form this new peer working group, and now we're going to form this selection committee. And again, when you form these public committees and they're going to be operating in the sunshine, I mean, you've got to go through all those things that include public work, and it could be cumbersome. We can leave this in here for now, but I think it just adds another step in the process that may delay the project a substantial amount.
Well, why don't we cross out A new? If we get rid of that, it's a selection committee. There's gonna have to be a selection committee. How that gets appointed, how that, it may be that it's the same committee that,
Maybe the working group.
Right.
yeah, or parts of it or whatever. So I think if we just get rid of that, we're stating an obvious here, but the important point is, I think to everyone's point here, that it not be 5 beanheads from City Hall that go in here and come up with this, that it's representing the community and other key players, so.
So does it have something saying including community and so and so and so and so?
That's what I'm saying, is let's define it to say that it needs to be made of community members, design professionals, and staff and appropriate professionals or whatever for the inside.
Could you say something like, for example, but not limited to, and so throw them out as examples? Because I'm wondering about, a design professional from St. Petersburg. Is there a reason that that's in there? Did that come from someone saying, we feel like there's just too much outside representation? There's not, professional representation from St. Petersburg. So, I mean, again, not to say that it has to be made up of that, so you could say something like, for example, but not limited to, and eliminate the numbers on there.
Yeah, I think you just get rid of that and say community members, design professionals, and staff.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, that sounds good.
Are we okay with the time frame?
Clearly not.
It's no reflection on your question.
Ed, does this sound like another day at the office?
Please cease operations and leave the building utilizing the nearest exit or fire exit stairway. Do not use elevators. Repeat, do not use elevators. Attention. An emergency has been reported in this building. Please cease operations and leave the building utilizing the nearest exit or fire exit stairway. Do not use elevators. Repeat, do not use elevators.
Here just waiting.
Let's just stick with it. It's gonna adjust itself.
Attention.
Next step.
Attention.
Shortlist.
An emergency has been reported in this building. Please cease operations and leave the building utilizing the nearest exit or fire exit stairway. Do not use elevators. Repeat, do not use elevators. Attention. An emergency has been reported in this building. Please cease operations and leave the building utilizing the nearest exit or fire exit stairway. Do not use elevators.
sketches of what
Repeat,
the
do
plans.
not use elevators.
Uh,
Okay, I think we were down to,
On the firms, if you go back, because I didn't hear you
okay,
well, and on the one right after the committee, when you said the shortlisted firms submit their preliminary concept and you wanted to combine something, I didn't write it down.
no, well, I asked if we should
Okay.
combine that and we,
With the March.
right. And then we discussed in the March, April 2015 timeframe, public input selected by, we'll talk about kind of a laundry list of ways to make sure that the public's still engaged.
And we're taking that list away now?
Well, I think you can just simplify it, combine a bunch of those together, and then add another one, other processes, new programming.
Okay.
You know, you just, again, that's going to determine itself.
And we don't need to mention the marketing plan there at all? I don't think so, maybe.
I think because we were talking about a comprehensive market plan, and I think that was our intention, that
How
we
about-
would go through the whole process.
Right.
But how about we instate that, just say continue, what do we call it, marketing, just whatever we said there before.
Program, public awareness.
Yeah, marketing.
Marketing program.
Public awareness marketing.
Okay. All right, and then the next step, selection committee ranks and recommends a firm. We have one bullet point underneath that, consistent with community input and budget limitations.
And then we also talked about consistent with programmatic requirements.
Any other changes, thoughts, comments? The next step, city council approves selected design firm. All right. And then the next step after that, selected firm works on schematic designs.
The only thing I see is the last bullet point, an additional community advisory group. I'm not sure that we, again, back to your point before, do we want to yet do one other group? I mean, I think. How about if we just get rid of an additional community
Attention.
and just
An
start
emergency
advisory
has been
group to
reported in
inform,
this building. Please
to
cease
evaluate
operations
information?
and
Again, how that's comprised, it could be members of the existing, it could be members of the selection, let that determine itself. The point's good, but again, outlining that a separate one has to be created, I think is the problematic issue.
Okay. You were interrupted by this loud noise.
I'd just say strike an additional community.
Which is the advisory.
Yeah.
Okay. Good. Then the second, the final step, design refinement, city council approval of design, permitting, and construction. And then
Maybe, I would actually just separate that out and maybe put, and it can be the same date time, but permitting and construction is its own line item.
okay.
Because the one process is selecting it,
Okay.
and then there's all the permitting and construction just needs to be separate, I think.
Okay. When you talk about design refinement too, I'm not sure who does that, what that means. I mean, I know kind of what it means in an individual project, but who in this project would be responsible for something like that?
It's gonna be your selected firm.
But who monitors that process? I mean, maybe that's not our design, our purpose to determine that, but
Well,
in our projects, I mean, anything that we would do, we would be the ones to oversee that, say we need a design refinement here. Who does that? City council, this committee?
How about if we just add that as a bullet point under the previous section? Because that's what you're ultimately doing. You're going through the process, and then you're redefining the design, and then the city council is going to
Okay.
define it.
I'm fine with
And
that.
then the advisory group will have will be able to weigh in on that.
Yeah.
Part of the
Okay.
design refinement, okay, good.
So, yeah, I'm a little slow to catch on.
Okay.
How are we gonna do this?
Add a bullet point under the June 2015 through September 15.
Okay.
And just have design refinement, just move it right on.
Okay.
And then your 2016 through 17 as city council approves final design.
Okay.
Actually, you may want to change that to more specific date, because really, then you're talking about 2016 through 2017 as your permitting and construction process.
Right. So what do you want to change the date to?
Well, why don't you say October 2015, city council approves final design,
Okay.
and then 2016 through 2017 is your permitting and construction. And Chris can have the causeway approved in that time frame there.
There was nowhere in there a vote or vetting this through some voting process to the public, which I'm not endorsing. I'm just saying I didn't hear that part. Yeah, I'm personally against a vote, but I know it was brought up a couple places and it might be considered if we didn't like it. I got to think that our concerned citizens would have never formed if we would have had something that was palatable for us. We just thought that was so far outlandish, the lens, that we formed to stop it. But there's, in anywhere, is there word vote in this process, Bob?
Not vote, but the whole process of June 2015 through September 2015 has many bullet points, including multiple media coverage and community meetings held to refine the initial concept. I think it's in there.
Why don't you want to read through them? Just,
Using all public input gathered to date and additional input gathered during the phase. Second bullet point, community meeting will be held to refine the initial concept or identify alternative design concepts. Third bullet point, multiple media will be used to keep the community informed and engaged in the design process. Fourth is advisory group will be formed to evaluate information, advise the city, and provide input throughout the design project development process. And then the final bullet point is design refinement.
And that's after you've selected the basic idea. Right?
Yeah,
So
this is,
you're really.
here's
If
the
we got the
basic idea
three-bedroom
and now
house
we're
all
going to tweak
done,
it.
we're just working on the trim.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. No, when you decide on the three-bedroom house, that's when you got to get buy-in by the city, by the people. And then after that, it's just let the professionals do what they do. Because you have a budget. The whole thing is you got to make this thing happen within the budget that you have.
And I think we've made it very clear through all these bullet points that what we want is the community engaged from point A to point Z.
Programs are established.
As long as they're not from LA and have no knowledge of our community. Did you put that in there, Ed?
I don't remember reading that, but
We'll let that one just be implied.
I think it should be brought up just west of Mississippi.
Any other? Nice work there, everybody. motion and second, all in favor? Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Finally, the last thing we have to do, and then we'll go to open forum, is to review the objectives of the peer working group. And we made some changes. Let me just go through the changes one at a time, and then we'll just discuss them. The first change is bullet point number 4. And if you recall, at our last meeting, Mayor Kreisman in his statement back in June came up with some objectives for this new committee. And in the objectives, I put Mayor-elect Kreisman's objectives in bold, and then the ones that we added are not in bold. In bullet point number 4, we changed that at the last meeting, and it addresses the operating subsidy. Initially, we had minimized the operating subsidy, and after our discussion at our last meeting, we changed it to read maximize the economic benefit to the community while minimizing the operating subsidy. Is it clear like that? The next bullet point, we made a change earlier in this morning's meeting. Complete engineering to include life cycle and cost analysis of the existing pier. Next bullet point, update marketing analysis. That didn't change. Next one, provide multiple redevelopment alternatives, including construction costs associated with each scenario. And then the next bullet point, we made some changes. Evaluate economic viability and feasibility of design alternatives based on each business model, or for each business model, including sustainability. Make a change here, including the base case scenario, utilizing existing funding, including, that didn't read well at all.
We like the including word. I was going to suggest something like this: evaluate economic viability, comma, feasibility, comma, sustainability of design alternatives for each business model, including the base case scenario utilizing existing funding, as well as identify funding concepts for each design alternative. That'll work.
Not including.
Yeah, that's why I was trying to eliminate them. So evaluate economic viability, comma, feasibility, comma, and sustainability of design alternatives for each business model, comma, or dash, including the base case scenario utilizing existing funding, as well as identifying funding concepts for each design alternative.
Okay.
And before I forget, Ed, I know we talked before about funding the comprehensive marketing program. Should we add that? I just thought about that in the bullet that it's update market analysis, and should we go there and be specific to be consistent with this in the process, or is that even necessary on the objective?
Well, I think the marketing analysis in this bullet point is more related to the program, not
The community funding of the marketing.
right, not explaining to the community what the pier is about.
Okay.
We did a market analysis as part of the Pier Advisory Council of what businesses would work out there, which would, and that bullet point speaks to that marketing analysis.
Okay. I just didn't want to lose sight of the part about us funding and making us down the line.
Okay. The next one, update funding and financial information. We shortened the wording that we had at our previous meeting. then the last change is develop a public information campaign to utilize current community input and solicit additional community feedback during the evaluation process. I don't know if we wanted to use that word campaign. Right, right. I'd like to shorten that bullet point. Good. How about if we shorten it to read, develop a public information process to utilize current community input and solicit additional community feedback. And then the last was just a grammatical error. The last bullet point, it reads, determine potential public-private partnership of other opportunities. Switch that out to and other opportunities. Questions, comments on the objectives of the peer working group? Good. Can I have a motion to approve? So moved. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? The motion carries. Well, good. Before I open it up to the public, if the public wants to weigh in, I want to thank everybody for all their hard work. Get this project done. I know Mayor-elect Kreisman is very, very pleased with the work of our committee, and I can tell, and he's said it multiple times, he's very pleased with the work of all the different committees. So I'll go ahead and make these changes today and get them up to you and forward them on to the leadership. Any committee members have any other comments? Anybody from the public would like to address the committee? Or we'll start on this end. Dan.
I'd say I'm looking forward, and maybe our group is looking forward to working with the Kreisman team, and this committee did a nice job. And I would just like to reiterate the importance of a few points. Urban Land Institute was just in town, and so that ULI aspect of how they looked at this, one of the key things I took away from it is they saw some events moving from Noy Park over to what I call Pier Park. So when I look at the Pier project, I look at it as Pier Park. And so that whole area, that whole uplands, that park area is key. And so in the Chamber's presentation, in which Ed Montanari sits on, as the Pier Task Force head of the Chamber, part of what the Chamber's, Chris Steinecker said, listen, can we just agree on one thing? No restaurants. We don't need any more restaurants. And he's right in some ways. We have 4 more restaurants opening up at Baywalk. Beach Drive's full of restaurants. We got a lot of restaurants, but we kind of want a family restaurant or something that is different when you're sitting out over the water or even in the hub. So just remember that when you chair the task force at the Chamber might have misguided some of this information and got us where we were confused, and there's a disconnect there. And in that programming aspect of what we want out there might be in a conflict with what the Chamber's looking for, according to what the task force said at the last meeting that you and I were at. So I'll bring those comments to the table.
And let me just mention, at that task force meeting that we had at the Chamber, those were Chris Steinacker's opinions.
He tried to get a vote to agree with him.
Yes, but we didn't have a vote, we didn't take a motion. I don't agree with that. You know, we had a marketing study done as part of the Peer Advisory Task Force, and it was clear of you know, what should work out there and what should not work out there. So
thank you for clarifying that on the film and everything.
Sure. Good. Bill?
I just commend
to all of you. This is hard work, and thank you for what you're doing, and I think your product is going to be very helpful for the city.
Thank you. Great.
I'd just like to say the same thing, appreciate you all serving, and we need to have community support, community input, and this is great. I'd like to thank you all for doing that.
Good. Thank you.
Yeah, I've got a couple of points I guess I'd like to bring up. And I'm sorry, I missed some of the meetings here. Does the city have a to-do list right now to generate some reports? We had talked about some type of cost analysis, like a business model, and what the subsidy was before, over the years. So is there anything on the table now that the city's working on for the next?
There's a fair amount of information, and what we will do is we'll let the new administration guide how that gets processed. Some of it's been released already. That would be just the financial analysis, the engineering analysis on different cost alternatives, utilizing smaller piers and no retail around the word pyramid. But beyond that, there's probably additional studies that need to be done, and as identified in this report. So there's nothing that isn't pretty much out there already, I believe. But we clearly want to let Mayor-elect and the team guide the next process with these recommendations.
And then I missed, you guys probably covered this earlier last week, but the survey, which implied that it would cost $70 million, not 70, but more, if it costs more to refurbish the pier and keep it. Going back to the original budget numbers from years ago, and it was said that we needed $50 million to repair the approach. Is that number still, was that number accurate?
I don't know if I can answer that. That was a number from 2003. So, I think there's some tremendous information in the report done by the engineering firm Parsons Brickerhoff, which is still a great, viable firm locally. And I think there's great information in there. That being said, at 10 years old, clearly there's a lot of updates.
And at the time, was that just the approach? I mean, because really the pier building, technically the pier building actually is not needing to be replaced by itself. The approach has to be.
The focus was on the approach. And the condition of the existing 1,500 pilings up there.
And Leonard, if I could add, it's so dependent on what kind of road you built out there.
Yeah.
So until you are specific about what that access road would be, how wide, how long, how high, all that stuff, and any number is justified as time.
Yeah, that initial budget had just, I think, $4.5 million for renovation of the pier, and everything else was structural stuff. It was something like that.
That $4 million was actually as part of the TIF interlocal agreement with the county. That I don't believe was even, that $4 million specifically wasn't referenced in the Brickerhoff. That was the part of that initial TIF funding allocation, which has been amended 3 times since then. The initial one being in 2005. So, in any case, sort of fast forwarding, there's about $46 million in the current capital budget, and of that capital budget, studies, including some awareness, can be utilized out of that. So, based on the last experience, the actual project costs themselves, including demolition, was about $37 million, and these activities are going to take reasonable amount of money to get done, and it's money well spent, but that actual construction budget really shrinks every day that goes by, not including the fact that the costs just to issue bonds on things like that are going up every quarter right now. So there's a compression in the budget, no doubt, as time goes by.
And is there, anywhere in the report, is there, and I'm just speaking for myself, but on behalf of those people who sort of just wanted everything to stay the same, is that on the table in the report as far as, hey, at least for a baseline to work off of, if you just rebuilt the approach as is, everything the same size, kept the pier open as is, what's the cost to float around in the press for that option?
That's the $74 million.
Well, there's a 74, which is the same size approach, and then a reduced approach that's, I think 45 or 46 million.
So it was 74 million to replace everything as is?
As is, 100 foot wide, yeah, which is, generally people agree that that's probably not necessary. And I don't recall if it was a 60 or 80 foot, I think it was a 60 foot wide approach to arrive at $6 million. This 50
Yeah,
foot.
50,
So essentially cut it in half.
Do they get 50
It's just
feet
sort of,
wide?
you know, I had a long talk yesterday, Raul,
Yeah.
and the cost for this whole thing, it's all about the bridge.
Right.
The bridge is where the big money is. It's just how tall, how wide, and that's where you spend money. But at the end of the bridge, you know, it's the road, it's the extension of Second Avenue Northeast. You're gonna build a building, whether it's 800 feet out or 1,000, and it's not dramatically more expensive to build that building there than it is on the uplands. So it's really about.
Assuming you have the case loads.
Well, no, even if you, it doesn't matter where you put that building to some extent, the money is still, even if you're only gonna have a 500-foot long approach, if you built a 50-foot long, 500-foot long, 50-foot wide, 500-foot long approach, it's half the cost of what we're talking about. And you put a curlicue building there that has a restaurant in it, so there's a ton of options.
But just for, I guess for the record, so to do everything exactly as is, I mean, without the final quote, but roughly 74 million, just to say, okay, we're just gonna rebuild the exact same approach, same road, same apron.
That does not include, correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think that included the 39,000 of retail around the apron.
That's correct. There's substantial, you can maintain the pyramid, but there's substantial code issues. You have to raise the ground floor. It's just that simple.
Right.
That changes your stairwells, elevators, and the numbers contemplated by the engineering department, whether it was the 74 or the 46, took that into account. So you would have a revised elevation, you'd be a minimum of 3 to 5 feet higher as you enter the building. May render the first floor useless, but it did not include what is today about 36,000 square feet of retail commercial.
Right. But really, it's the apron underneath that was the expense, to build retail on top of it.
Correct, yeah.
Because
On
it
average,
requires a pylon.
the shell on top is not expensive.
Right.
The
Okay.
perimeter shell is not expensive for that retail. It's only the
It's making a big
substructure.
fat bridge.
Okay,
It's
then
the
my,
bridge, like I said, it's all the bridge, it's all on the bridge.
so my final point would be, what is the committee's recommendation for utilizing the existing pier, which I believe is air conditioned, and the approach, which has not been condemned or anything, as far as using it for a parking lot or opening it up as a viewing center? I mean, what is your recommendation? If it's going to sit empty for a year and a half, is that the recommendation? What do you guys advise the mayor to do while we come up with a new final design?
We haven't addressed that aspect of.
Shouldn't we throw them some ideas or tell them?
Chamber came up
with their
We discussed it at the chamber. Mayor-elect Kreisman has his view on the pier, on the fence. And he stated publicly that he would like to have that fence removed and to let the public have access to the complete pier. Short of the building.
Yes. Just one recommendation, why don't we, especially if people want to explore the commercial subleasing of it, why not lease it for a year with a lease that can be canceled at any point when the new design is just as office space or whatever you want. Somebody wants to lease it for a year, then we come up with a new plan. At least you're making some money on it.
You mean inside the building?
Yeah, just the whole building out for the next year.
I think that would be something for the administration to take up, after they take office.
I just lay in that all the equipment's been taken out. You can't build a restaurant or start throwing equipment in. It would be very expensive to have a one-year lease.
It would be difficult.
Prohibitive almost. You could have a food truck from the
businessman.
Now, you could have a viewing operation and a hot dog vendor, but at least you wouldn't be paying $20,000 a month in security. And then whoever leases it would be responsible. So even if you're leased at $1 a year, you're coming out ahead.
The chamber voted to leave the fence across the front and not go up here. That's what we voted, right? Ed?
We didn't take a,
Took a vote, said we should put some plants in front of it, put some descriptive stuff there,
right,
and not open the head. That's what the chamber voted.
right. We wanted a more attractive,
Yeah.
Termination.
right.
And that was
Couldn't we get that guy back out there that goes like this?
Anyway, just for the record, as a citizen of St. Pete, I would like to see it open, even if it's empty, to be able to go up on the roof and just an empty, whatever, at least it wouldn't look like an abandoned eyesore. And if it requires one security guard walking around in there, or if it was only the roof and the elevator and nothing else, that would be my personal preference, because who knows how long, if this process ends up getting delayed. I know everybody wants to fast track it, but if it gets delayed and delayed and delayed, let's try to make the best point of the entire thing, the point of the survey that went out, was people want to see the city. It's a platform in the air to see the entire city of St. Petersburg, and it costs next to nothing to have that. Let's use it while we have it. That's my recommendation.
Well, thank you. Bud, everything for us?
City of Tampa decided they wanted to have an art museum, and they hired a world-renowned architect, and he came up with some pretty fancy designs. And the process stumbled forward from running up bills, and Pam Iorio, when she came into office, terminated that process and started over again with a local architect and built a really first-rate building that houses beautiful art and lets art be the focus. And several of us, Bill Ballard first pointed that out to us, several of us have felt that we hope that's the model that's going forward here, that this second process will produce something that the public likes, that's more consistent with our history and with our culture. It can be built within budget. And I say that because I don't think Valens would ever have been built within budget. And what you folks have done is begun that first step. And so I'm really comfortable with the report you're making, and I sure hope the next group takes that report to heart and performs the way everybody in this room thinks they're going to perform. So I want to add my thanks to all of you for participating, and Ed, I especially want to thank you. God love you. You have been chair of these committees over and over and over again, and anybody that was on that original task force for a year and a half, and Ed at one point said to me, I want my life back. and he keeps on volunteering. Special thanks to you, my friend.
Well, thank you, Bud. And thank you all for coming and participating. We've got Pastor Murphy still on the phone. I wanted to see if, Pastor, are you still there? Do you want to make any comments?
No, I don't. I just wanted to think about Nathan joining us last year, and he's one that I think has done a great job. Big deal. Not much that seminar, just packing on really well. So sorry, it
Well, thank you for participating and being able to multitask from the great city of Houston. Well, okay, well, thank you, Pastor. Once again, thank you, everybody, for participating in our committee. Thank you for the public for coming in and weighing in. And just keep the bottom line in mind.